From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Killnet threatens to attack Italy in Russian war. IBM caught poaching BMC in mainframe mayhem, and China quietly tries to expand its cyber presence. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Steve Zalewski, the co-host of Defense in Depth. Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Always enjoy the opportunity.
All right. And before we move on, we want to thank our sponsor, Fruit. Know your client-side attack surface. Join us on LinkedIn Live. Go to CISOseries.com on your Universal Resource Locator bar. Look for the Week in Review page. Click that hyperlink, and then you will find the further hyperlink there. We don't have time for all of this internet nonsense. We've got about 20 minutes, so let's get right to the news. First up, pro-Russian hacker group Killnet announced plans to attack Italy. The announcement was regarding a planned cyber attack on Italian infrastructure by the pro-Russian hacker group Killnet. It was not the first attack that they had launched or announced, and it turns out that the attacks were indeed made, but Italy is still there. So, Steve, is this kind of the Elon Musk tweet of threat actors like, hey, we like attention, please look at us? And do these kind of, move beyond just attention-seeking tactics? And could these be dangerous just in their messaging for things like knock-on effects for an economy or something like that?
Yep. So what I would say is I agree with you. This feels like kids getting on a Twitter account and trying to say to everybody, hey, I'm here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, when I read it, I kind of yawned. My first thought was yawn, right? As a CISO of a company I'm trying to protect, there was nothing in it that drew my attention. Now, to your point, if I was Italy, okay, I am going to have to pay a little bit of attention, right? Because as a nation state attacking me potentially, right, I have to be able to at least do an assessment to see how good this group is. Are they nation state capable for attack? Are they a bunch of kids that are out there trying to get attention? So I'm obligated, if I'm Italy, to take a look and see just how serious this might be. But as we can see, obviously, either it was a nation state that didn't really care, or it was a bunch of kids that are out there just trying to get some attention, right? And in either case, to your point, it was just one more. There will be others. And again, that's kind of how I look at it when I just have to triage and move on.
Yeah. Is there a spectrum to how to respond to these when we're seeing like announced cyber threats, whether it's coming from a group like Killnet, which has performed, cyber attacks before in the past, versus like, there's something officially coming from, the North Korean, intelligence agency or something like that. Like, right, there is a spectrum on how, on a CISO level, at least, you should be thinking about these.
Yes. So we look at these attacks all the time, right? They come in. Sometimes we get them from their various feeds. And what I would do, right, is if somebody was coming at the US, okay, I would have to go shields up. I mean, we call it shields up, which was I would have to increase my posture.
Mm-hmm.
The posture might mean I am going to do another security awareness campaign if the type of attack might be phishing, or I might have a heightened awareness out of my team, right? And maybe have 24/7 coverage with an extra guy. So I would do some due diligence just to be able to acknowledge that there's a possibility so that when my leadership team asked me, what are you doing? What I can say is, well, I'm doing my due diligence. We've upped our posture a little bit, but it's all relative to the likelihood of how it might impact Levi's, for example.
All right, next up here, China makes an offer to 10 nations to help run cyber defenses. China has begun talking to 10 nations in the South Pacific with an offer to help them improve their network infrastructure and other cyber capabilities with the help of Chinese tech vendors. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on a tour of Pacific nations this week and next. The nations include Kiribati, Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and East Timor. All are very small, heavily reliant in internet, but also highly strategic for communications, shipping, and a range of other international priorities. Steve, there seems to be more here than China just being a good neighbor or doing some door-to-door sales here. Given what we just looked at with, like Killnet in Italy, do you see any red flags here?
So when I saw this, the first thing I thought was fox in a hen house. Okay. Meaning, if they offer help, that same help that they're offering is giving them threat intelligence. Well, that threat intelligence to be able to stalk an attack is also invaluable intelligence about what your country looks like.
Mhm.
Okay. So they're not giving something away. In my mind, I thought they're helping, but they're getting more than they're giving. So if I was one of those countries, the question I would have is, well, what is really my risk against nation state attack or against organized crime? How much is cybersecurity really impacting the health and welfare of my country? And if the risk is high relative to the value, to the consequence, then maybe I take China up on the offer, so long as I realize that the offer is not as good as it first assumes, right? That I am giving up some stuff. And so therefore I'm addressing one risk, but I'm increasing the risk on the other side. Now, there's a political consequence to that, like we talked about. So I like the fact that they do it. It makes them look good. But I think for every one of those countries that when they see that offer, I suspect if they have any kind of a cybersecurity practice or experts out there, that will be the conversation that actually occurs prior to them deciding what they want to do.
All right, moving on. IBM to pay $1.6 billion for poaching customer account. This week, a U.S. district judge in Houston ordered IBM to pay $1.6 billion to BMC Software for swapping in its own software while servicing their mutual client, AT&T. After a 7-day non-jury trial, the judge rejected IBM's claim that it fairly acquired the business from AT&T, who was one of BMC's core customers. The judge noted that IBM's role in AT&T's choice to dump BMC smacked of intentional wrongdoing. Don't you just hate it when a company smacks something, maybe a little bit more caressing from the companies here. But here we have two of the biggest players still in this mainframe market, still a much bigger player in computing than most consumers recognize, admittedly, probably a staid market, but still large. And IBM appears to be pulling a sneaky stunt. From an insider threat perspective, this smacks of more than just competitive dirty tricks. If a trusted vendor starts installing unauthorized hardware or software, Steve, I'm just curious, your take on this.
So here's the key. Is this a business issue or is this a security issue? Okay. Unauthorized hardware, meaning it's not in the contracts that the two parties have with each other, doesn't mean that it's not secure. When I read this, I just thought, I don't think anybody is surprised. This isn't the first time that big firms, when there's $1 billion at stake, are going to find a way to steal from each other. In this case, they got caught, right? And it happens periodically because it's a gray area. And so somebody was a little too aggressive. Somebody maybe thought they could get away with it. So what I saw was it's nice to see periodically you have to hold somebody accountable for something that occurs all the time at different levels. And so I don't think anybody saw this and would be surprised in the least. And a year from now or 2 years from now, it's going to be another two big ones for these big contracts where they're nominally aligned, but they're effectively competitive.
All right, but right before our break here, hackers could steal WhatsApp accounts using call forwarded. Rahul Sasi, CEO of CloudSec, posted details of a trick that allows attackers to hijack a victim's WhatsApp account. The gist of the hack involves tricking the victim into calling a number that starts a process of basically re-registering the account with a new password. Typical SIM swap or account hijacking technique, kind of from there. But Steve, once again, we have a hack or attack or whatever you want to call it that first relies on getting a human to make a mistake. We hit on this question basically every episode. Now, what can be done to stop people from falling for these tricks at this point?
Nothing. Humans, at the end of the day, are the weakest link. Done. Okay. If I could make humans do what I say, the problem would go away. But humans just won't. And here's what you're really saying to this is, look, everybody knows passwords are a problem because people write them down. So the answer to that is two-factor authentication, security tokens in different capacities. And we used to have, You had to carry the second token with you. Everybody might remember RSA IDs. Okay. But the control friction, the control of implementing second factor authorization against the people's willingness to be imposed upon is the control friction can be too high. So what do? We go with less secure ways of two-factor authentication, like tokens over your phone. It's much more convenient for me to be able to do that, but it's also less secure. And therefore, it becomes easier for the bad guys to do a man in the middle and get it. So it's still going to come back to multi-factor authentication works, but the discipline that you have to implement the most secure forms will always be subject to the control friction of how the business consumer sees it impacting them and how much they're willing to accept.
In that kind of control friction space, do you think we're going to be seeing more than we already are, kind of behavioral modeling for these second factors to kind of clue in when there is a man in the middle situation?
So I'm going to say everybody thinks passwordless is awesome, right? And everybody says if we get rid of passwords, the problem goes away. This is an example where, yes, as long as we implement the second factor with sufficient discipline, but that's why I talk about but there's degrees of that because you've always got to be able to understand what the business is willing to accept.
Hmm.
Okay. So to the point of can we eventually solve this problem? Passwords are never going to go away. That's always going to be there in some capacity. Multi-factor authentication is going to do this. Passwordless is ultimately what we're saying. And to your point, then, if I can't trust authentication, then authorization is difficult. Then the user-based analytics or being able to provide additional context as a way to be able to be defense in depth is actually where the industry is going.
All right. Well, before I move on to our next story, I want to spend a few moments with our sponsor, Faroot. Faroot secures client-side web applications so that businesses can deliver a flawless and safe digital user experience to their customers. Inspector and PageGuard, Faroot's automated data protection solutions, increase code visibility, facilitate threat analysis, and detect and protect from dangerous client-side attacks, such as MageCart, cross-site scripting, e-skimming, and other threats focused on front-end JavaScript and web applications. Learn more at Faroot.com. SCOTUS puts Texas social media law on hold. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of putting Texas's HB 20 law on hold, while a constitutional challenge goes forward in a lower court, likely on First Amendment grounds. The law would ban social media platforms with over 50 million users from moderating content on the basis of viewpoint. A group of tech industry trade groups filed an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court to prevent it from going into effect. You know, Steve, once again, we're seeing this kind of uncomfortable crossover between the private sector and public statutes. One could draw parallels to something like television and movies, where we've seen content either self-regulated or out and out regulated for decades. But is that a fair comparison to make, do you think?
So, yes, I'm going to keep it simple, which is yes. There are the conservative and the liberal side of the pendulum. And what you're seeing here is this constant debate around where's the right middle ground. And so I love being in America because this is exactly how we do this, right? Which was for me, when I look at this, there's no right answer. Okay. You got to find the gray area. And so what you're going to find, hopefully, with this is nobody's going to be happy with the answer, but everybody will be able to live with it. From a security practice side, I don't really care where that is. But what I need to know is you got to give me the guidelines so that now when I worry about data privacy versus confidentiality, right? I have to be able to provide that. And people are going to now say, and you got to be able to provide controls that can figure out when things are moving outside of that domain. So I appreciate the debate, but at the end of the day, I simply need to know, so what, now what? What are the controls and what are the policies I have to put in place?
Yeah, and if this constitutional challenge eventually goes up to the SCOTUS, we might have that definitive ruling, although that probably looks like it's years out if it ever gets to that point. But we will see. There's multiple laws out there. Probably one of them ends up in the Supreme Court before too long again. So
Yep.
look forward, 2024. Week in review, we'll be talking about it. All right, next up here, Australia names first cybersecurity minister. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese appointed Victorian MP Claire O'Neill into the newly created post, which grew out of the Home Affairs Ministry. O'Neill previously served as the Shadow Minister for Innovation, Technology, and the Future of Work. Shadow Minister just means they're in the opposition. They're not shadowy figures, at least as far as I know. So, Steve, here in the U.S., we seem to have an overflow of cybersecurity departments and agencies. Interesting to watch other countries handling growing concerns around cybersecurity. Like I said, this was previously housed in the Home Affairs Ministry, getting its own direct reporting, essentially, is the big issue here, I think. If you were in charge on a federal level, would you prefer this kind of one single ministry or a wide collection, as we are want to do here in the States?
So the first thing I say is when I saw this, I thought it's excellent because, putting it bluntly, if you're an alcoholic, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge you're an alcoholic so that you can figure out how you get better. Okay. What Australia has just simply said is we know we have a problem. Regardless of how we've handled it in the past or haven't, we now know we have a problem and we're going to take steps to address it. And so seeing a first cybersecurity minister, no matter where it is or where it's located or who it is that first step of realizing it is now a national level conversation. And we're going to start to put national level policy in place and put some people in there to address it. So whether it was the opposition or whether it was in different, you know, policy locations in the country, to me, when I saw this was here's another country that just stepped up. Okay. They know they have the problem. They're going to figure out in their own way what their risk postures is, how they're going to manage it. But at the end of the day, they've just made that first conversation of we have a problem at the national level and now we're going to start to address it. So kudos to them for getting to that point.
When they get to the atonement step, I want to see how Minister O'Neill handles that with your alcoholic analogy. But we'll cover that in the future cybersecurity headlines.
In 2024,
24,
we'll be back. Okay,
the year.
the year 2024, we'll see.
All right, and next up here, leaked Conti chats confirm the gang's ability to conduct firmware-based attacks. The analysis of Conti's group chats, which were leaked earlier this year, continued to reveal information, including that the ransomware gang has been working on firmware attack techniques, which would give threat actors significant power since they'd be hard to detect, highly destructive, and attackers can use them to achieve long-term strategic goals. They just really long dwell times, potentially, is what we're looking at here. Steve, does this concept of firmware attack techniques worry you, seeing that as a potential next evolution for kind of our ransomware age?
So for everybody that sees this, this is a giant red flag. And I really appreciate Eclipsium to put this forward.
Mm.
Internet of Thing devices, IoT devices, operational technology devices, okay, the manufacturing devices, they are going to be ever more suspect to these types of attacks because that firmware is out there. It's going to get old. It's not easily updated. So from a vulnerability perspective, we are laying all these new vulnerabilities as you're deploying these thousands of types of devices in IoT and to a certain extent in OT, and that they're commingling. So to me, as a CISO, and as when I look, depending upon the type of company I have, this is an area I better start getting ahead of because this really is the canary in the coal mine telling you that this isn't going away. It's actually going the other way. It's going to become an ever more popular vulnerability that's going to be easier to attack.
Yeah, and just thinking about the number of kind of white box, no label IoT devices that are out there, even if they're not directly on your network, but that your employees are going to have to interact with. The idea that you could get into that is truly it can be daunting. So at least good that we're signaling this, that like you said, that Eclipsium is putting that out there and getting everybody's attention with this, because it is definitely a growing concern.
Yep. Last story. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Ransomware demands acts of kindness to get your files back. Goodwill Ransomware, which the security firm CloudSec described this week, isn't interested in extorting money from you. It wants you to do something good for the world. Like other ransomware, which is a criminal activity, Goodwill encrypts the usual file types, but insists on video proof of a victim supplying blankets to the homeless, taking homeless kids to Pizza Hut. I guess Papa John's didn't get the contract, and paying medical bills for people who couldn't afford them. Steve, this particular incident might seem like a clumsy approach, motivations, kind of like this Robin Hood cybercrime approach here. But, where's the stop? We see, environmental hacktivists doing the same things. Would that fall into the same bucket? Would we feel differently about this? I'm curious what your take is on Goodwill ransomware.
Yep. So this is lipstick on a pig. It's illegal. It will always be illegal. The fact that they're trying to find to make it feel.
To your point, making it feel, we're having a little issue here, but
Sorry.
feel that
So
it's, go ahead,
yeah.
Steve.
So I'm sorry about that. So yeah, with lipstick on a pig, it's illegal. You may try to make it feel less illegal by saying, hey, but we're trying to do something right. But at the end of the day, you're holding me hostage. So I looked at this and simply said, don't be confused by somebody trying to make it feel less wrong. It is just wrong.
All right, Steve, before we get out of here, was there any story you reacted strongly to that you give a thumbs up to, an eye roll to, just something that really struck out from today?
Oh, I got to go back to the pro-Russian hacker group Killnet plans to attack Italy today. I was just like, seriously, of all the things I got to worry about, and like we talked about in the other stories, that was my biggest eye roll. Man, it was just like, come on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve Zalewski, the co-host of Defense in Depth. Besides Defense in Depth, where can people find more of your great stuff?
You are welcome to look at my LinkedIn and be able to talk to me there. And I post a lot of what I think about. And if you do, and you answer some of them, you could be referenced on an episode of Defense in Depth.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, also, thank you to our sponsor, Fruit. Know your client-side attack surface. Just a reminder, next week, there will be no Super Cyber Friday because we're doing it on Monday instead. So it's a Super Cyber Friday Monday. So please join us online or in person Monday, June 6th. We'll be live and in person at the Microsoft Reactor Space in San Francisco. Our topic will be hacking economics of email fraud, an hour of critical thinking on how InfoSec professionals should manage the financial impact on your business. And we'll have some amazing guests, so be sure to check that out. Whether you can be there in person or online, you can just go to CISOseries.com, click on Super Cyber Friday's logo, and read more and register. Of course, we'll be back with another Week in Review show, starting as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. And biggest news here, if you haven't already done so, check out our new show. It's called Capture the CISO. It's a competition where CISOs judge vendors on 3 key variables. Is it innovative? How easy is it to deploy? And does it solve a need? Find out more by going to CISOseries.com. Click on the blue Capture the CISO logo. Very exciting. And finally, and certainly not least in my heart, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.